Hello fellow trainers, welcome to our complete review of Pokemon Scarlet. There will be major spoilers for Pokemon Scarlet, so if you don't want to be spoiled, please click off now, but before you go, leave a like and subscribe to come back, and let's go ahead and jump in. And as we think about this review, this game is really amazing, has a lot of great qualities, but one fatal flaw that might do it in and be its undoing. If you're excited for more Pokemon Scarlet and Violet content, love monster taming content, hit that like and subscribe button and let's jump on in. The first thing I want to talk about with these new games is the compelling story and storylines that you're able to play through here. You have three main storylines, starting with Victory Road, which is going to be collecting 8 gym badges, going up against the Elite Four, and eventually taking on the champion. We have Starfall Street, where you're going to go up against 5 different bosses, all with different typings, to hopefully take down the villainous team. You will find very quickly though they're not so villainous. And then we also have Path of Legends, where we go up against the Ancient Titan Pokemon to ultimately help someone gain some herbs for picnics. You'll quickly find out that that's not the full story, that we're actually helping one of our friends save their Pokemon that's been severely injured. And as we go through that storyline, we get power-ups for our legendary to help traverse the world. But at first it seems a little iffy why we're going on Path of Legends, but it does become my favorite storyline. Mainly because of the connection between that trainer and their Pokemon, which I thought was just so heartfelt and really resonated with me personally. The Titan fights are pretty cool. They vary in difficulty from really easy to find to, in my case, the False Dragon, which is super difficult, and we will have a guide to get through all these different Titans in Scarlet later on. But the battles are fun, the cutscenes are really great, and like I mentioned, Arven has such a deep connection with his Pokemon that ultimately it's really fulfilling and rewarding to help him get all the different herbs to get his Mablostiff back and ready to battle after a really tough encounter in Area 0, which we'll talk about much later in this review. Starfall Street was, I think, one of the best implementations of a villainous team in Pokemon. You quickly find out that the team is formed actually because people were being bullied, and the Starfall members were the ones to stand up to the bullies, but ultimately it was placed on them for causing all the havoc. It's a really heartfelt story. It has a lot of weight to it as well, and I really enjoyed the characters and the way they portrayed this team. So often it's just the villainous team is villainous and they do mean things to Pokemon and to humans, but in this one it really felt like they were characters I cared about, I wanted to see more of. I was invested in the storyline, even though in terms of story progress this probably had the least to do with story progress. I was so happy to go through it. I wanted to see it through to the end, and actually had a decent amount of content with it. You have the 5 different bosses you go through, then you actually go up against a director, and then you go against like the big boss as well. And that leads directly into some of like the post-game or 4th storyline content. So overall I thought the story was great. It wasn't my favorite, but it was really well thought out. And we briefly touched on the Victory Road story path. It's not much different than other Pokemon games. The big difference is that you can choose when you challenge each gym. We'll have a guide for that as well, because you can skip gyms and then get into a little bit of trouble. But overall, you go through 8 different gyms, you have your 4 Elite Four members. When going in the right order, the gym progression seemed really fair and it felt challenging as well. And the last thing we'll say about this, because it's not very different than traditional Pokemon games, is that each of the gym leaders had a really distinct personality and was a joy to interact with. And that's a common theme throughout this game, is that it's really charming, it has a lot of personality. It's a huge contrast from Pokemon Sword and Shield and from Pokemon Legends Arceus, which felt really flat and lifeless at times. And once you complete all 3 of the initial storylines, you get a 4th storyline called The Way Home, which has to deal with your specific legendary. You go to the 0 area and you find out the secret behind your professor. In Pokemon Scarlet, you find out that the professor actually passed away a long time ago, and an AI has taken over and has been raising their child and serving as professor for this Pokemon region. Really interesting, a big difference compared to other Pokemon games where it's a lot more straightforward in terms of relationship between you and the professor of that game. This storyline is pretty short and to the point. You go to 4 different bases, you unlock them. You eventually come across the professor and have a couple of battles with the AI. You have some resolution. Overall, it's just okay. It ties the story up together nicely and leads into the post-game content, which in the post-game you're able to do a gym rematch of all the gyms. Then you have an ace trainer tournament that you go up against 4 different people that you have to win 4 in a row. And then you can go into some raids after that. So there's just so much content. Next, we'll talk about the Pokemon themselves, which the new roster I think is really strong. There have been some recent Pokemon games that I really wasn't a fan of the roster or even the regional forms. I ended up picking the water starter Quaxley. 1, because I like the water starter, I always pick that. And 2, I actually thought it was the best design in this game. And in terms of gameplay, it was a little tough early on to have a water starter, but for like the Elite Four and some of the endgame stuff, it was super helpful. I will show the evolutionary line on the video here so you can see how this Pokemon progresses, but I thought it was really awesome. And because I picked the water starter, my rival picked Fuecoco, and that line is super cool. I think by far, probably my favorite fire starter evolutionary line, even ahead of Blaziken and Infernape. It is super solid, its cry and vocals are really cool too. And lastly, we have new ancient forms that I'll show off here in the video as well. We're actually seeing this in one of the final battles for the game. I'm going up against a really interesting final antagonist. But these ancient forms look really awesome. They seem really powerful. Volcarona's ancient form is my favorite so far. They add a whole new dimension to Pokemon and what's possible in terms of form, so I'm really happy to see them included. Along similar lines, we also do have a new gimmick. You can basically terraform or terrestrialize your Pokemon. I thought it was cool. One of the better gimmicks, not as good as Megas in my opinion, but it is fun to be able to change up the typing of your Pokemon. It does give you an extra boost. If you are into the gimmicks, and like that's a big reason why you like buy these games or enjoy them. Really solid gimmick, and the transformations look amazing. Although there are some performance issues with the game on the initial and first patches, the transformations for the gimmick look really good as well. And while the new Pokemon and storylines are really great for this game, they're a huge improvement from previous Pokemon games, the performance and graphics still leave a lot to be desired. There were many times while going through really dense areas of the game or just seeing objects from far away coming towards you where the game struggled in dropping frames, or those objects that were kind of out of focus or out of sight were blocky and choppy. Hopefully that improves as the game is out for longer and we have patches, but the initial playthrough was rough at times, and at this point, unfortunately we expect that from Pokemon games to some extent, but we've seen things like Breath of the Wild go on the Switch and be wildly successful and smooth, so I do question why we keep having that problem with Pokemon games. So if you know you're someone that's going to be bothered by those frame drops or not having really high quality textures on some of the terrain in the game, definitely watch some more reviews and gameplay and really see if that's going to bother you. Outside of that, I think the game is really solid, but it is a big consideration on the performance on the Switch. Make sure to check that out. Again, in my initial playthrough, it was a little rough at times. I was okay getting through that though, but something to consider. Alright, so we've talked about the storylines and game length. We've also talked about the Pokemon in the new Pokemon game. Let's talk about it being open world. We've been told many times that this is an open world game. We were told that with Legends Arceus, which was technically true. We were told that with Sword and Shield to some extent, but it was not true. So let's talk about the open world in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So in this game, you are not moving between hubs. You have free reign of the terrain in the world. In the beginning of the game, it's a little difficult to traverse because your legendary can't swim, can't jump really high, can't glide yet. But once you unlock those things via Path of Titans, it becomes really easy to get around. It's fun to go in the nooks and crannies of the Pokemon world to find different TMs and items and things of that nature. So it is really, truly an open world game. I will say it is so big that in the beginning it kind of threw me off. The story isn't linear, so you can go through the different gyms and Path to Legends and different Starfall bosses in any order that you want. But there is a recommended order, and I didn't follow it at first and got off the path, and because my legendary couldn't climb, couldn't swim, and it was confusing because I felt like my Pokemon should be able to do these really high jumps or climb up certain surfaces, and it wasn't able to, so some kind of blurb or disclaimer in the beginning of the game to tell us, hey, this Pokemon looks like it can fly, but right now it can't, would have been helpful just to know that the limitations were temporary and not just a part of the overall gameplay. Before we get to our concluding thoughts, I wanted to share my overview and my general experience playing these games. Overall, it feels like these are the new best Pokemon games. This is the standard in which we expect all Pokemon games to be, if not better, moving forward. It's really done a great job of implementing the overworld. It's done a great job of implementing an open world. The stories were tight and concise. I liked the freedom, basically once you get out of the intro. However, the one fatal flaw for these games is the performance. Again, if you're going to be bothered by frame drops or low textures, things like that, let's see if a patch comes out to help it out. The initial gameplay, like I mentioned, was a little bit rough. So everything is really great about this game except some of that performance, which I really hope improves because these are great games, just not great performing games, and that's a huge distinction. But thank you for stopping by and hearing our review. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and comments on these games as well. Please leave a comment down below to let me know what you think. And if you're into Pokemon and other monster taming content, please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Alright, bye.